Hello, world, and welcome to what will become mini conversations, where we'll be discussing the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series by John Vervaeke. I'm here with my friend, Lizelle, and we will be discussing episode 1 today. So basically the first whole 24 minutes of the beginning is an actual introduction where John's kind of describing what the meaning crisis is, what awakening means, and a whole bunch of different concepts that will be covered for the whole series. So Lizelle has watched and reviewed this series many times, and I actually am just starting it. So we're coming from two different perspectives where I'm truly like a beginner, and she's how did you put it?
Advanced beginner.
Advanced beginner. So we want to just take apart some of the concepts from each of the episodes and kind of encourage people to actually watch the series themselves by picking out some of the major points and having conversations about them. So I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle if you want to kind of get us started on this little back and forth.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think what it might be important place to start is to say why the work of John is so important to us, to me personally. And so I would like to, the concept we did, or the image we just discussed already, the words came to me, I'm dancing on the edge of the abyss and I need a harness, I need a rope tied around my waist. The image that came to my mind with that was actually dancing on the air over the abyss. So that's even more scary. And John is a tool maker par excellence, and symbolically also. And I see his work as a type of tool that can keep me safe while I experiment, while I play with the sacred and with trying to cultivate wisdom, trying to I personally think of wisdom more as an entity, a woman. That is, I can walk with wisdom. I can not necessarily ever be wise. So trying to get to know wisdom. John is he's a companion along the road that one really cannot do without. So that's why I think his work is really important. And then what you mentioned when I first mentioned this to you is really important as well. Like, we're also kind of now trying to tell people out there, like, hey, if you accidentally fell in the abyss, if you try to play with the sacred and landed in a bunch of bullshit and you need to get out, but you can't get out by yourself, we're trying to get to know this rope and we're throwing you a rope. Like, we're here for you. We want to help you, to pull you out of the abyss, to pull you out of the bullshit, and bullshit in the technical sense of the word. So I think that's all I want to say to begin with. It's like, why bother with John's work? If we want to regain our ability to play with the sacred, to see things as sacred, we need some sort of tools, and he's a tool maker.
Yeah, I love that. The tool maker idea is like this concept of what Lizelle's describing is when we are kind of like in this existential moment, something, doesn't necessarily have to be something big is happening, but you've kind of reached this point where you're questioning your existence, like really deep thoughts. And sometimes we can drive ourselves insane when we go to that place. And so what John is creating is that tether to pull you back if you do reach the abyss and kind of go too far into it. Because when we get into pattern recognition, we can drive ourselves crazy when we think too far and extrapolate too far. So that's the abyss that we're talking about. So that's amazing, and that's a good way to start the conversation, because you always want to start with, well, why are we even talking about this? So yeah, John is a tool builder, and he's providing the pathways for us to reprogram our brains to think from a different perspective, and just kind of like encapsulating those, because he also gives reference to a lot of people. In fact, he almost always prefaces with a resource or a reference or somebody else that he got his information from, which is another thing I really love about him, is it's kind of collective wisdom. Um, so let's start with kind of some of the beginning. So he's briefly mentioning like the light and dark factors of this meaning crisis. And so kind of to describe the meaning crisis, it's good to get an idea of how it is kind of arising. So what I have here is things like the light factors would be Buddhism, cognitive sciences kind of merging together into this kind of transcendental mindfulness, all these kinds of practices. And then there's research into wisdom and what actually wisdom is in the cognitive sciences. That's something that people are very interested in, things like Stoicism and Greek, all kinds of ways of living like that. And then this venture into psychedelics, which is an altered mind state that people are experimenting with, and even Johns Hopkins is also doing research with. So this is becoming more mainstream for people to allow themselves to experiment with psychedelics. But then there's these darker sides, like we were talking about with the mental health crisis, and there being bullshit everywhere. And then us spending too much time in these virtual environments. And then this leads us into ideas of apocalypse and zombies and crisis and collapse that's pervading, he says, the human thought realm. So do you have any things to add to that, or any insights with that?
Just, I think what's really important about the dark side of the place we're in, the meaning crisis, is we're losing touch with reality. Because a lot of his work has also become to realize the real, to get back in touch with reality. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, that's so, I mean, and then there was like two ways that he describes what realize can mean. So it's so interesting how we're awakening from the meaning crisis, and we really need to understand the words that we're using.
That is very important indeed, to understand the words that we're using. And that was part of why we wanted to do this, right? Is because he uses words that's like, oh, okay, what exactly does that mean? And it's good to have those, because those words are also tools that we can communicate and connect with. And we don't have to always explain everything. We can just use that word and then we know what we mean. Yes, realize the two senses, of course, is like, you realize that you have, that's what it means. You have an insight. But the other realize is also making real. And what is the context? I think he uses in the context of meaning, realizing meaning, right? In the cultivation of wisdom.
So, yeah. And so I think that like moves us into, this is the main question is, or he keeps coming back to three questions, is what is meaning? Why do we hunger for it? And how do we cultivate wisdom to realize that meaning?
I personally think his real, but maybe that's just me projecting on him. His real project is not so much about meaning as about wisdom. That's my personal point of view, but maybe that's because it's my project. And that's why the solution is also in cultivating wisdom.
Yeah. Like, I mean, he's basically coming up with the answer to the question that he's posing by.
And like I've mentioned also, he, in the past, it's like he's now just given up, and he's now also referring to the series as a meaning crisis series. But in the past, I've often heard him mention, like, it's important to say it's awakening from the meaning crisis series. It's not just the meaning crisis. It's not just about the meaning crisis. It's how we can awake from it. And that awakening, the wisdom, is central to that. And the cultivation of wisdom is, I think, and the tools that he makes is also for cultivating wisdom.
Yeah, like, okay, so now we've described like tools are pathways, and tools are also words, the vocabulary here, because that's a critique that I've heard of him is, I don't know what he's talking about half the time. And you mentioned to me that he even says you kind of need to go through this series in order to understand and conceptualize what it is he's saying, because words are so important. They're actually like, words are the way that we describe our ideas. And so the only way that we can communicate with one another is to use the same words.
And it's more than that, because I've read somewhere a long time ago that the language that you speak also frames the way you see the world. So if we have words, and if we understand words that shows us the world in a certain way, it's as if it also opens our eyes to seeing the world in that way. I mean, his 4 P's of knowing, he doesn't actually mention it in this episode, but it's coming. That's spoiler alert. That's also it, once you know the words, you're like, oh yes, that is true. So it gives you insight, the words itself. So it is definitely important to not just glance over the words or push it aside as academic language, or it's much more than that. It's really.
Yeah, I mean, before we get into the meat of it, because then he starts going into the Upper Paleolithic period. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But there was a couple of things. So metaphors. So just like we were talking about with language, I mean, the way that we talk is metaphors. So something in life is analogous to how a sentence has meaning, is what he says. Something in our life with these metaphors is analogous to how a sentence has meaning. So does that bring anything up for you as far as like what he means by that?
My mind is already now with the books on the new Paleolithic period. So, and the importance of a symbolic way of thinking and seeing, and how that makes us human.
Yeah. Go ahead, please. Go on.
Well, basically that's what. So I've got a few of the books here. That's what this person, David Lewis Williams, claims to be part of what made us human, or sapiens, I should rather say, because Homo neanderthalis is also human, strictly speaking. And this book very explicitly, this is a great book as well. Matt Rossano, I think he refers to him quite a number of times in this episode. And the importance of being able to see symbolically and being able to see metaphorically, how important that was, because apparently, according to this book, the Neanderthals didn't have that. And that is why we survived and they didn't. And so that gave us the edge. And so that is so deeply ingrained in who we are as Homo sapiens that, yeah. So that's what my mind, if you say, can you repeat the phrase? Like,
yeah. I have it written down. That's why it's so easy for me. It says something in life is analogous to how a sentence has meaning.
Or you think talking then about the time when he talks about the projectile and
so you were describing like Neanderthal was different in that, well, they didn't have that kind of symbolic language. And this is highlighted, or I guess you could say that we could see this in the way that they didn't use projectile weapons. So their weapons that they used were like bludgeoning weapons, or like getting in there with the animal, you know, they got a brute force through it, where Homo sapiens had developed spheres so they could throw them. They were much lighter and they could project that projectile. So they're like understanding a lot of different things too. Their mind is just working in a completely different way, where they know, like, and this is like, I think something that people aren't going to be able to conceptualize unless you do actually think from that perspective. So you have to put your mind into these two different ways of thinking, where one is I've got to go attack the beast so I can kill it so I can eat it. One is I'm going to throw this thing, I'm going to launch it, and I know, because I know that when I throw this, it's going to hit that thing over there. And so now I've like done something external to me. I've used a tool and thrown it at this animal.
Yeah, you're crossing space-time, the ability to cross space-time in your mind. That's what is necessary for this projectile. You have to be able, because when you combat, you know, body to body, you don't have to cross any space-time. You're there with the beast. But from a distance, you have to be able to cross space-time. And he refers to it being the prefrontal cortex that was like on fire at that stage. Because both of these books also mention, like, it's not so much, although the Neanderthals were different, but it's not so much that our brain structure changed. John also refers to this. It's he calls it the software, not the hardware. Well, this book explicitly talks about is how our states of consciousness changed, like dramatically. And we were able to not only access different states of consciousness, because he says probably the Neanderthals could also do that, but they didn't have the words or the capacity to bring it back and to integrate it with the group, and then to help it to flourish and to grow and to build upon that. It was just because cats and dogs dream, and dreaming is a different state of consciousness. So they must have also had different states of consciousness. They just didn't know how to integrate it socially.
So they may have, maybe one Neanderthal like threw a rock and killed something and wasn't able to like articulate that message of, when I did this. Is that what that kind of means? Is like they weren't able to bring it back to the group to disperse that knowledge?
I don't know for a fact that that's what it means, but it seems plausible to me that
Okay.
that could mean indeed that it happened by accident, and then they just forgot about it because it's not it wasn't something that made an impression on them necessarily. So they had no intention of doing it again. It's just like, oh, something happened, but okay. It's like what I'm not sure. I think it's supernatural selection talks about the burial rituals, for instance. And that may be also interesting. Like the Neanderthals also buried their dead, but they did it without the decoration and the symbolic significance that we had, because it's practical to bury the dead. Otherwise, they're going to rot and get everything, like everyone sick. But the more symbolic aspect, the ritual aspect of the burial, was only with sapiens, and so that is a big. So they can, it's another thing that I was thinking about this morning when I was going through the books again is Frans de Waal is a really important primatologist. In one of his books, I think it's him, can't remember for sure, he mentions like if you take a human child and above a certain age, I imagine above 4, because they have to have that self-awareness already, probably around the age of 6, and you take a primate like a chimpanzee and you show them how to open a box, for instance, but you have the human explaining it or illustrating it, do all kinds of unnecessary actions as well. The human child will also do the unnecessary symbolic actions, while the other primate will not. They will just do what's necessary to open the box. So we have this absurd, in a way, in that context, because inclination to make symbolic moves and gestures and words, and which the other primates lack, apparently, and then probably the Neanderthals as well.
Yeah, we were talking before we started recording about sporting events and how people have kind of rituals for that. So this is kind of like ways that people can think analogously to this kind of concept of ritual. What's so important about your jersey being the same one you wore last time they won? Well, there's some kind of ritual about that. You have to sit here because that's how it worked last time. So this so symbolic representation becomes something that is apparent during this Upper Paleolithic period, which is like he's saying anywhere from 40,000 to 10,000 years ago, when humans start making art. They start doing, like you were saying, with the cave paintings, and there's ritual to that. And then he goes on to mention that there's this first use of calendars and a symbolic representation of time. So like this is another concept that we're just like totally accustomed to and don't even realize how it's always working in the background of our mind, this concept of time. And well, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and that was how people told time. So we've invented time, and now it helps us to understand the world in a different way from this period, this same time period where they're starting to use projectile weapons is what I'm or maybe just near it or just before.
I think it was all the upper new plate, that thing that you can say, but I can't say so well.
You said it once.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the great transition when we became oddballs.
Yeah, so we're moving through history. So we started out, of course, like we talked briefly about John and you know the work of the awakening from the meaning crisis, and then we've moved now through the Upper Paleolithic period where people start to symbolically understand things. They're starting to do art. They're starting to create projectile weapons and just like metaphorically understanding the world. Time is a new concept, and then we move into what he's saying is maybe about 30 to 60,000 years ago when humans almost went extinct. And so this was like a really important time.
Yeah, that was probably also like the I think it was before the new Paleolithic time. That was what was the like the trigger,
I
which is
see.
very interesting because crisis. I mean, crisis means also an opportunity for growth, and so yay for us being in this huge crisis currently. It's like,
We'll come up with
um,
some new ways to solve some problems, hopefully.
yeah, it's. I mean, it's adapt or die, right? And so we'll see which one it will be, but definitely we are also now in a period of adapt or die.
Which is why we decided to do this. I mean, you and I, neither of us want to like we're not comfortable necessarily like having discussions that are recorded, but the reason that we're doing this is because we know that John and other people are bringing forth ancient wisdom. That's you know that's part of it, is to understand like what is it that helped us to evolve to this, and you know what is it that we're looking at now, and can we call upon our elders, our ancestors, to describe and help us to come up with new inventive ways of using old technology. Exaptation is something that we're going to talk about too. That's a term which applies here, using the old tools for new things. I mean, I guess in just like a simplistic way of putting it is being able to, for instance, the tongue is something that he mentions, is that if everything that had a tongue could talk, it would
It
be,
would,
you know, this would be a really bizarre world. So like tongues did not evolve for the purpose of speaking, even though they are the reason that we have speech, because they disrupt this passageway of air. And so, you know, that's just one example of exaptation that he uses in the episode.
I just also want to point out John's very interesting relation to cats. He often made reference to cats, and he seems to be really afraid of cats. It's
It's kind of cat omen.
like it would be terrifying if cats could talk, he said. So
They probably
I
have a
don't
lot
know
of
what
bad things to say.
I don't know what a cat ever did to him, but apparently it's left its mark.
Dramatic experience. Oh man. Okay, so actually that was interesting because did have that to talk about next. But okay, but before we get into tongues and exaptation, there was something really important that happened when there was that bottleneck experience for humanity, for humans. So once we had that great reduction in mass extinction, or not extinction, but I guess a
Near.
near extinction. Okay, a near
Yeah.
extinction event, and so we go into this situation where there's like I think he said like maybe like 10,000 people or something like that left. There's not a lot of people left, and so what we evolved to do, the way that we adapted to this situation, was to get involved with trade, like a larger global trade, I guess. This was kind of where that whole the Mesopotamian area becomes this trade route, as maybe as a way to resolve this issue of there being this near extinction um, event.
We had to work together. That's the important part there. Like if we wanted to survive back then, hint hint for what we may need to do now, we had to work together. It's so and trade, because trade is like, oh, I have all this fish, but I can't just live off fish alone. I also need clothes. You have all this skin that we can make clothes from. So let's work together. You give me your skins and I'll give you some fish. And so that's what happened there.
Yeah, because it like before that, I mean, well, we were talking about like civilizations and you know starting to create art and projectile weapons, and there was this point in which, well, maybe not a point, but the surviving cultures that we know about settled, and they created civilization, and they started to observe their surroundings. And so in these kinds of situations where you're in a community of people that you know, and so now this has dwindled down, there's smaller communities, probably less people within these smaller communities, so less people to provide different sorts of resources. And so the adaptive move there is to, okay, well, let's integrate with that other community because they grow corn and we grow wheat or whatever, you know. And so now we can trade because there are less of us in this village or this community that we were thriving in before. Now we have to work with people that are not in our kinship. So this is something that's really important to mention, is that you know, he says that we live amongst strangers. This is something that we know. When we live in cities nowadays, we don't, like, half the people don't even know people in their apartment complex. Like, so much less cities. Yeah.
So yeah, indeed, that was, and so that is the one part, like the rituals that we needed then to be able to contact these people in a friendly way, like to establish friendly relationship, like the handshaking and stuff that he mentioned, like, what are you doing? Like, oh. So funny. But also what I then loved is how we, that also like the in-group then became more challenged. So the initiation rituals also became, came into being, because that was needed then. You had to prove that, hey, my loyalty is with this group. Like, I might go shaking hands with that group. I love their corn, but my loyalty is to this group. And yeah, the importance, how rituals then became relation, and how rituals is relational. And that is also really beautifully expounded in this book. The relationality of religion and religious rituals. He uses the words religion made us human, and I just love that, because part of my mind is going into direction that an answer to the meaning crisis might be to become really human, to really fall back into what it means to be human. And the loss of religion is then really, really terrifying, if religion is what made us human to begin with.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point with well, what was it that you said was relational?
Religion. Religion is about relationships. That's one of these opening sentences. It's about relating. And John always uses, when he talks about religion, he uses relegare, the Latin relegare, which means to bind, to connect, that whole relational quality. I also like the other Latin word, religere, which means to reread, because reading scripture, sacred text, is really important to me. And I also think if we reread history, we might also gain quite a lot of insight that could also be really helpful. And so I also like the rereading interpretation of religare instead of relegare. But yeah, John goes with relegare most often, always.
Okay. Spoiler alert. So because well, we talked about, like, there's trade, what was it, trade relation, how does he put it, darn, initiation, there's, okay, trade rituals. So the trade rituals that we talked about are the handshaking, like, you know, certain maybe even nonverbal communication, but verbal, because you were talking about before that people wearing jewelry, and that would kind of tell someone your status. So there was like nonverbal communication that people were starting to understand about one another, because now they're interacting with different groups that weren't, like, when you're with your community or your village, I know everybody here, everybody knows me. There's no need to have this kind of like a question about trust. It's like, if I stole something from you, everybody's going to hate me here. I'm going to get exiled. So I'm not going to do that. But now we're working with different groups. So this trade ritual of shaking hands or whatever it was at the time allows us to know something about each other. Like, you're in the club, basically. Like, okay, so you know the handshake thing? Okay, cool, you're in the club. I mean, we still have that today. Like, people do daps, or like whatever it is that different cultures will do. People bow, people do the hands. So there's different things that we mean when we do that.
You're playing by the rules of our society. You're playing by the rules of the rules that needs to be played by if we want to trade, if we want to interact peacefully, and yeah.
And then so that was trade, and then there's initiation, so as to say like, okay, now I'm interacting with this other group that you don't maybe necessarily interact with, because I'm the fish person, so I'm going to go talk to them because they've got nets. You're the corn person, you're going to go talk to somebody about whatever tools that you need. So now we have this initiation ritual too, because that's to still tell this group that I'm committed to them, basically. And these will be things like, I mean, we know it today is like hazing, but back then it was like they're going to put you through the ringer, and you're going to prove yourself as somebody that's part of this group and somebody that's committed to this group.
I think like traditional cultures still have something quite terrifying, some quite terrifying initial rituals. I know of a tribe in Africa, in South Africa, that still initiate circumcise young boys, which is I imagine it must be quite painful. I don't know, but I can imagine it's quite. And they also before that go into the wilderness for a couple of days, painted white and by themselves. And yeah, so those were probably like the initial initiation rituals back then as well, like being exposed to the environment completely by yourself and coming back and undergoing a very painful endeavor to prove your loyalty, to prove that you're a man of the tribe.
Yeah, and this is because he mentions this concept of being tempted by the strangers. Yeah. So you have to have these rituals for that proof that I'm still committed to this group.
That also brings us to the shamanistic rituals, which is actually maybe the highlight, because that might be where we got our altered state of consciousness possibilities from, which is then what made us who we are today, which brought to life this symbolic way of thinking, this imaginal way of thinking.
So we've discussed now the Upper Paleolithic period, moving this frontal cortex development, and then we've moved through symbolism, art, and then through this kind of bottleneck event that happened, we began interacting with groups of individuals that we were not related to. It's no longer our kinship. And so we have to develop rituals around trade, first of all, and then in order to know who is loyal to us, we have initiation rituals, is what he calls them. And then, well, so we mentioned a little bit about exaptation earlier, like utilizing ways of, well, in biology, that was that tongue example of, okay, all these species evolved to have tongues, but only one of them talks, and is utilizing this poison detector and
in our face hole.
In our face hole. And this thing that, yeah, helps us to digest food, all those things. So we're utilizing this now for a separate purpose of we've created language. So that's exaptation. But another term that we really wanted to talk about is what exaptation can kind of be related to as far as like on the mental realm, which is psychotechnologies. So this is something that we adapted and we use in a different way, but then we also have our brain that has evolved and adapted to do different things, like find food, find shelter, find water. Those are like primal instincts that we have. But we also have different software that we've now developed, these psychotechnologies. So he says, there's this whole moment where he's like, this is a tool, this is a tool, these are tools. And like really like going hard about like everything about me that is not naked me is a tool, to include my jewelry, to include, my microphone, of course, or like just everything that I use is a tool. And then he mentions that these psychotechnologies are also tools. So things like literacy, which allow our brain to connect to a different point in the future or in the past. Like now that we have language, this psychotechnology, it's almost like
it's more the written down psychotechnology that he's referring to than language itself.
Okay.
That's important, because that's the
Yes.
psychotechnology, like literacy, being able to write down and then, okay, now I can read what I wrote this morning or yesterday when I went through the series again, and I can send you a letter and then you can read. So we connect through the psychotechnology in ways that we haven't. This is in a way a psychotechnology. Like here we are sitting so far from each other and we can talk. We can talk to it. Okay, although it's not a psychotechnology, it's a technology that we use in order to be able to communicate, because it's not in our mind, and the psychotechnology has to be in our mind. So I correct myself there.
Okay.
So but this is a really cool tool that we can use as well.
Yeah, it's like a toolbox.
Yeah.
Because he does make that distinction between linguistics and literacy. So like our ability to communicate with one another, that's something that we've kind of evolved to do. But literacy is like a whole different thing, writing down the words and being able to even envisage the words in our head. Is that the psychotechnology?
Literacy is okay. Writing is a psychotechnology that really enhanced our ability to use knowledge, communicate knowledge, transfer knowledge. It's yeah. I want to mention, because when you mentioned like the acceptation of searching for food, like I think I read somewhere, but I can't remember where, that almost the same neurons fire in our mind when we're searching for information than when we're searching for food. So that's also really interesting, I think.
Wow.
It's like, yeah, it's that hunger almost as for information, then like for knowledge. I just thought that was cool.
I like that metaphor too. I mean, because people say that hunger for knowledge, we've got to thirst for.
But our brains literally apparently have a hunger for knowledge.
Yeah. So with I like how he's mentioned, okay, and so he says that the tools become a part of our body. So in that, like he says when you're backing up a car, you can feel it. There was this whole period of time when I first started using computers at a very young age, and I could feel when I had hit,
because it wasn't there when I was young.
Exactly. This is the thing about my generation, is that we grew up with the computers. And so we have this ability to move between the spaces of, I'm pretty good at computers, but I'm also really good at living in the past before computers existed. So I feel really compelled as this age group to be able to communicate with my grandparents about technology and pass that, brain material to them somehow. I don't know how. And because my grandma now can operate the air fryer. One day she was like, I don't know what buttons to press, and she's sitting there pressing all the right buttons. I was like, okay. Nobody told her how to do it, but she actually kind of started to be able to work with technology a little better. She still can't work her phone, but anyway, all that to say
is more important than communication.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Well, with my computer, the feeling of being a cyborg. So she's a cyborg in that she's got a replaced hip, she's got a pacemaker, like that makes her a cyborg. In fact, her doctors have called her a cyborg before. But now we're even at this stage of like human evolution, I guess, where now this is going to be really a silly example because anyway, when I would hit copy and paste, so like when you're in a word processor and you hit copy or cut, even more so because the word goes away, I could feel it. I could feel the weight of that word on my cursor as I'd like move it across the screen. I was like, there's something to that. So I've got like this concept of there's something there. So it made me think about like when he's saying things like these tools become an extension of our body. A lot of people that are in the gaming world will like be able to like automatically press buttons, and it takes time to kind of train your body to work with machines. But now we've evolved to be integrated with machines, as he put it, which is obvious.
The example he uses lately, because I think the paper he did on it was only recent, after he did the series, the Awakening series, is the Mars Rover, and how the scientists who operate the Mars Rover, I don't know if you've heard this, like they completely start to embody the Mars Rover, and it's these scientists who are completely non-theistic, and non-theistic is not the right word I should use. not religious. I don't know, but they're materialists. They're scientists. Let's just keep it there. But when they talk about the rover, they will start to say, okay, this is they will put their body in the position of the rover and say, okay, because this is then the camera. We need to go like this. And they will completely start to embody the rover, which is like on Mars, and it's very far, but that is a tool, then a cyborg type of tool that is then becoming one with even something so distant. He even tells the story of one of the guys or woman, I'm not sure, one of the scientists. I think it was his wrist that I think it was that he hurt the morning gardening. And then the afternoon when he got to the office, the rover's leg was stuck. And he was like, oh my God, it's such a coincidence. It's like, so even those type of things, they really embody, they really become one with the rover. So I think that might be his new example for that.
Yeah, so this leads us right into, beautifully, the shamanic rituals, because we talked about the trade rituals and the initiation rituals, but then there's this other type of ritual that develops in our history, which is shamans. And basically he describes shamanism as a cultivated practice for altering your state of consciousness that taps into and exacts the enhanced mindsight that we were just talking about, like that mindsight of I'm attached to this rover on Mars, even though I'm clearly not. Wow, look at that. So synchronistic. So can you like describe some of the things? Because that's the beautiful thing about us having this conversation is I'm fresh on this, just listening to the videos, but you're actually like diving into the books that he's talking about. So that's one of them. And then the other ones that you've shown are other books that he's mentioned here. So from Mindsight, like what were you gathering from that one?
It's a great book, but it's one of those books, I don't know why. Some books I have to sit down and read the whole book. Other books I have to read a chapter a week. And this is unfortunately one of those books that I have to read a chapter a week. So I haven't finished it yet. But it is basically, and I think John speaks about this, about our ability to have insight in our own state of being, which then enhances our ability to have insight in the state of being of the person we communicate with by imitating their facial expressions. Unbeknownst to us, we do that, which then enhances our insight into our own state of being. So that is mindsight, to be able to see into ourselves and then also to be able to see into the other person. That is, I think, yeah. It occurred to me to maybe mention that it might be that everything I say is a complete misrepresentation of John. I hope.
I keep wanting to say that too. Like we might not be actually articulating the points that he's making, but I do think that
is another motivation for people to go and watch the series themselves.
So true. Yeah, we might be just bullshitting you. So that's a technical term from the first episode. So there's lots of bullshit everywhere, and we might be an example of that too.
Then we're bullshitting ourselves.
Bullshitting ourselves into believing that we understand what he's trying to.
We're not lying to you. We're not lying to you, but we might be bullshitting you.
Mm-hmm. As a result of having bullshitted ourselves. Nothing personal. But the reason that we're talking about shamans is that shaman to me is usually like kind of like this weirdo that's out in the, they're not the village, they're not within the village. In fact, they would normally be like isolated by themselves, and there's different things that they'll do, like sleep deprivation or isolation in the wilderness, or just like exposing themselves to the environment, not eating a bountiful diet, but just having rice and water, if that. Sometimes they'll go into complete starvation mode, because I was telling you about the vision quest, and that's something that I've participated in, so it's something that I have some kind of understanding of how this can put you into an altered state. And so one of the ways that I was talking to you was that the chief gave us a completely different way to think about when we weren't being fed and when we weren't getting water for a couple of days. just sitting out in the woods with exposed to the elements. And what I started to notice was that I was no longer thinking, first of all, with my primal need to get food or get water or get shelter, because that was out of the question. It wasn't going to happen. So then I started thinking from a different space. And he instilled in us this idea that if we did smell food, because they were down there keeping the fire for us. It's interesting. They were keeping the fire. And I'm trying to, yeah. So they're keeping the fire. They're also cooking a lot of food. You can smell it when you're sitting there. And he was like, if you do smell the food and you do hear us laughing, just know that we're doing that for you. And it really did help me in this state of, not eating and drinking water for 2 days. I was happy when I smelled food because I was happy they were enjoying it on my behalf, is what I was told in the beginning. So this kind of different way of looking at things was important for me, in that I couldn't have made it through sitting 2 days without food and water if I didn't have that perspective. So that's what the shaman does, is gives you a different way of looking at life. And what they'll do is usually they'll have gone through these experiences, or they'll have embodied, for instance, an animal. When you go to hunt an animal, even, you're trying to think from the perspective of that animal. And so a shaman will sit in the wilderness and kind of just absorb all of nature and start to understand the world through this completely different perspective of what we're accustomed to.
Yeah, the altered state of consciousness, that was probably indeed what made us who we are today, and that we can access that, and that we can share that with the community, which is also really important. It doesn't help you just go on a trip by yourself and you see and experience things. I imagine it can be meaningful and life altering, but the important thing for humanity, for the community, is that you bring it back and you integrate it into society. And that was then the role of a shaman.
Yeah, to share that mindsight.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like you're saying, like a lot of people will just like trip balls and just like continue to do that. There was actually this quote, and I don't remember who said it, but I learned it from my astrology instructor, of when you get the message, hang up the phone. And I think, like, even in addition to that, like, hang up the phone and then go tell everybody that whatever it is that you learned, because that's helping other people to see life in a different pattern. And I really love how in this video, in this first episode, at 51 minutes and 30 seconds, when he's mentioning the shaman is trying to disrupt the normal way you find patterns in the world. And immediately when he says the word disrupt, a siren goes off. And like, that's something that I noticed because I'm into pattern recognition. But I mean, the moment he says disrupt, there's a siren that's going off.
So. Oh, that is so cool that you noticed that. I did not even notice that. It's goes to show it's because I've watched it too many times. We need to look with fresh eyes at things sometimes to be able to see the new patterns, right? So
yeah,
that is synchronicity.
Well, and I think this is important to mention, like, this is how, like, we can spiral into craziness too. And the whole reason that we're saying that we need that tether, because I found that pattern, and I find a lot of patterns in life. I mean, this is like one of my jobs, is to find patterns in life. I'm a taxidermist, so I interact with the dead and I appreciate them and I have reverence for them and I understand life in a completely different way because of that. When you're posing animals, you need to be able to think about like what they were at least experiencing in a weird way. So in this weird way,
actually quite shamanistic if you put it that way.
Well, that's what I was just about to say.
Yeah, embody the animal so that you can embody the animal.
And the only way that you can actually do that is to get the story from the customer. They come to you and they're like, well, first of all, they had to go get their license to even shoot a gun. And then there's this whole process that they have to go through, but they'll do that exact same thing you were talking about with the rover, where they're like, yeah, he was just here like this and he was looking at me and I was looking dead in his eyes, and they have like this whole story about it. And so you have to recreate not only the natural image, but also the image that they've got, this idea that they have of what happened. And then I also do astrology, so it's pattern recognition. This job of astrology makes people think I am insane, and that's just like, that is part of it is that I think about life in a completely different way, where I'm recognizing patterns that, you know, people can say, oh, causation or correlation, you're getting all mixed up. And maybe that is true, but I'm just looking at life through a different perspective.
I
But
do want to point out on your behalf that you earlier, when we were talking about Jupiter and Mars, that it's not causation that you see in that. You see correlation.
yeah,
I just want to point that out.
yeah,
So
it all comes down to timing too, and like cycles of life and our understanding of timing. But yeah, that's the thing, is this is metaphorically thinking. So when you're using astrology, it's to embody the archetypes so that you can think from that perspective. So that's what the shaman does, is gets into this altered state. And that's, you know, whether it's drug induced or whether it's just deprivation of some sort, they're
dancing, drumming, that is a very powerful tool as well. Like,
yeah, and it's not just humans either. That was something that was really interesting, is that there are all kinds of species. He was mentioning crows will throw themselves off roofs to get like dizzy or something.
they will tumble down roofs.
So yeah, that's such an interesting psychotechnology of altering your state so that, well, is that a psychotechnology? I should ask, because I don't really know.
I don't know if that's just a simple psychological fact, and if it's in fact a psychotechnology. I think what we do in and after the altered stage of consciousness could be psychotechnologies. But I think the altered state of consciousness is just a natural way of being.
I like how you mentioned that, because you were emphasizing earlier about the participatory, so the doing, like the participating in that is like the utilizing the psychotechnology, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think like the way that we kind of wanted to end this was to, unless you had anything else you wanted to add about.
I do want to read the quote, unless you want to read the
yes.
quote.
No, I want you to read the quote. So, you know how I was just talking about how it's easy for me to like even feel crazy when I'm recognizing patterns everywhere. So I can bullshit myself. And bullshit is this technical term that we actually didn't really emphasize, that it is actually a technical term of bullshit.
We did say bullshit a lot.
We did say bullshit a lot, so that's good. At least we've like mentioned it. So you can go look up your own, just kidding, but watch the episode. So this is kind of that the purpose is to recognize when we're kind of bullshitting ourselves.
Yes. So the quote is, I've heard him say it many times in basically the same way, but when I try to quote him in my own words, it comes out really wrong. So I'm going to read it. The very same machinery that makes you so adaptively intelligent is the same machinery that makes you susceptible to foolishness or to bullshitting yourself. So like we were saying, that brings us back to that image that we started with in the beginning, why we need John's tools. Not only his tools for cultivating wisdom, but also he's big on rationality. We really need that, because that rope, when we're dancing on the air above the abyss, when we feel like, okay, too many patterns, just, yeah. If we try to cultivate, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but if we try to cultivate, and my experience is if you actually do the practices, it works. You grow, you are transformed. So if we try to cultivate wisdom, if we try to enhance our adaptivity, our intelligence, our insights, those things, the machinery that we're enhancing is the same machinery that makes us more susceptible to bullshit. So we are making ourselves, by default, prone to bullshitting ourselves. And that is why, we can't do this alone. We shouldn't try to do this alone. B, we need teachers. And John is a pretty great teacher in my estimate.
Yeah.
And he's been there. He's been on the journey for a while. He's had mystical experiences, so he knows what he's talking about. He's not just saying things from an academic. That's when you refer to all the reference he's making, that's this academic John. He is very deeply grounded in the academics, but he's also deeply grounded in the participation, the participatory knowing, and that makes him someone we can trust, as far as I'm concerned. And trust, I think, is really important going forward if we want to survive as a community, as a species.
Yeah. And it's important to understand that distinction between, I think it was wisdom. So there's ignorance and then there's foolishness.
Yeah, that is. Oh, I also wrote that down. To be
Yeah.
ignorant and to be in error are different. Yeah, so ignorant, not knowing, is not the same as being foolish. Being foolish is bullshitting yourself, or
Yep.
being unwise, or being ignorant is you just don't know.
Yeah. And okay, so there was this great example that he ends it with. I know we were saying that we were going to end it there, but I just thought about the 9-dot example. And so this thing that I wrote down, so that
I just want to say, apparently John was almost infamous for the 9-dot problem, even before he became internet personality. So it's good that you mentioned that.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is his claim to recent fame or past fame. But you can look at what the 9-dot problem is, and it's funny because I watched this episode so many times because I wanted to prepare for this, but I couldn't figure it out by even after having watched it a couple of times. I did, okay, so now I'm writing out my notes, so I'm going to draw the 9 dots and I'm going to do it, no problem. But then I was like, wait, I didn't look at it hard enough to actually know what the pattern was, because I was just like, it's like an arrow, but I didn't know, like, okay, how do those 4 lines connect? Because I'm so used to thinking inside the box. So that was something that he says is, it's not even knowing that you need to think outside the box, because I already knew I needed to. It's how to think outside the box. So this is what he's giving, is that tether that we're talking about, that rope we're talking about, is how to think outside the box and not, go way too far out into the abyss.
Yeah, the tools. And maybe this is also a great place to mention his upcoming series.
Oh.
Have you heard about that?
No.
So his upcoming series is going to be called After Socrates. And it's going to be all about, it is 45 minutes of lecturing, 15 minutes of practicing, all about the tools that the ancient used, like the Stoics and the other New Platonists, like used in order to enhance their ability to cultivate wisdom. So that's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Nice. So do we have like a release date, or is that keep your eyes out?
He said October.
Oh, wow.
So,
this month. Wow, we got a whole nother series. Like, we just started this series, and then we'll have another whole series to cover.
Yeah, the great thing about him is he keeps growing and learning and developing new tools. So one can never outgrow him until he's dead, I imagine. But until then, we have a teacher that's way ahead of us that we can follow with trust, which is great.
Yeah, I love this because it brings like a culminating image to me. I keep thinking about space, and we mentioned ground control to Major Tom earlier, because there is that whole, like, you can get so far out there, and if you don't ground yourself, if you don't keep coming back, then you'll get stuck, and you'll just feel insane. And then you'll project out that you're insane, so other people will think you're insane because you just feel that way. So now I have this image of, with cave diving, cave divers, they anchor themselves and they don't go any further than like the last hook point. So they can continue, like, you'll have cave divers that explore a little bit further, and they'll put down a little anchor that you can hook to. And so it's almost like John is like venturing further into the cave. And this is so beautiful because that book, The Mind in the Cave, that you were talking about, I was like, well, why is it that some of the people are going further into the cave? Are they the shamans or something? Yeah, they're the ones that are lighting the path. They're the ones that are going a little bit deeper, like, hey, let's see what's a little bit further out here. But knowing, cave divers know how to get back. They know not to get tangled up in their tether and, you know, all the things. It's not just, he's not just giving us the tools, he's giving us the full pathway of here's the instructions. This is the tactical training that you need to go through in order to be able to do this.
That's amazing.
Wow.
When I myself speak with too much reverence about him, and when I hear you speak it with, I almost feel a little nervous because I know he's very sensitive about not being put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
So we're not doing that.
Right. No, I mean, I keep saying, like, he is very good about like prefacing, like, this isn't my idea, this is person's idea, almost to the point where people can't, I mean, just as a, you know, little pointer, like, some people are turned off by that because they're like, I can't even wade through all of these references. Like, it's almost like the works cited pages in my face. But that's because he's got that whole George Washington complex. Don't make me the king. And it's like, no, okay, you're not. But what you're presenting and the way that you're presenting it is a way that is helpful for people to start organizing, because there's, you know, the internet is just this flood of information, but now we've got people that are going through and kind of ordering it a little bit and putting, you know, things into different apps that we have now. So there's this place that I go to have a Zoom call or a meeting, and there's this place that I go to look up information in this Galileo library or whatever it is. So he's now creating a toolkit, he's creating a toolbox that people can utilize, or a system of like critical thinking skills, but that just makes it so abstract. It is literally like having tactical training in mental gymnastics.
Practices.
Yeah.
An ecology of practices is what he's offering us, an ecology of practices. That's what he's doing.
Yes. Beautiful. Okay. I think that's great for like an introductory first episode, and we got a long road ahead of us to go through all 50, what is it, 52 or 54?
50.
50. Okay.
So it's 2 years if we do every 2 weeks. Well, I'm glad you're such a pleasant person to be with, because we have the journey ahead of us together.
Awesome. Well, we hope that we have encouraged you all to go check out the first episode, and we are looking forward to digging into this material all together. And in order to build community, we have no intention of, again, like, we're also projecting that message of please don't put us on a pedestal. That's not the intention. Or, you know, we're not trying to say that we have some sort of authority over any knowledge. It's let's share and exchange ideas and have this dialogos so that we can all move our mindsight and share that with one another. So thank you for joining us, and we'll talk with you soon.